What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the same. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have David Tile of article-writing.co, also nerdyjoe.com, and also cascadevirtual.com. The man's busy. David, before I formally introduce you, I always like to mention other shows people should check out of the podcast. Since this is part of the Top Agency series, I've had Jason Schwank on a couple times. He talked about how he built his agency up to 8 figures and then sold it, and then how over the past couple of years they've been buying up agencies, which is interesting. He's also got an agency group where he helps agency owners grow as well. He's got a great podcast, Smart Agency Masterclass. Also, Todd Taskey. You'll like this one, David, actually, and we're going to talk about this. Todd Taskey helps pair private equity with agencies. He's got the Second Bite podcast. And he basically talks about the valuation space in the agency world, what's going on. He, finds that sometimes the agencies make more on the second bite than they do on the first when they're talking about private equity. So super interesting interview, really, experienced guy there. So that's a really good one. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships and partnerships. And how do we do that? We actually do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the accountability, the strategy, and the full execution. David, we call ourselves the magic elves that work in the background to make it look easy for the host and the company so they could just create great content and great relationships. For me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, you can go to rise25.com. David has a podcast too. You can check it out, the Mavericks podcast. I've checked out a few episodes, really good. So check that out. And I'm excited. David Tile is the founder of article-writing.co. They help companies with content to impact their SEO ranking, their websites, engaging with industry relevant blogs and website copy, because ultimately it helps bring in more leads to that company. Also, he runs nerdyjoe.com, or his team does. They help companies get leads through cold email. Cascadevirtual.com is a virtual assistant company that is your success partner. He's a serial entrepreneur, 13-year agency owner, and he's 6'8". So if you challenge him to hockey or basketball, you watch out. So David, thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So talk about, you have a really interesting, just talk about and people can find it at article-writing.co. But we're going to talk about, I love your methodology for PR and how you build this whole kind of underground empire before you actually reach out. But talk about the article writing company, what you do first.
Yeah, right on. Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to check out the Smart Agency podcast and Todd's as well. Those sound like fascinating episodes. Todd's. And yeah, that's great. Let me tell you how we started Royal. We started an article writing company 13 years ago. I came out of college, and I'd spent a few years working with my father. He was in consumer insights, and we actually spent a few years at university during the summers building a social media research division. So I was heavy with a director there doing right on the sort of the proving grounds with, right as Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, all of these were just sort of starting out. And I just sort of came out of college. I've been on the floor with product development. I've been on the floor with, new business development. We were pitching to enterprise. We were pitching to, we had a bunch of clients like big banks here. And I'm just like, I have to be an entrepreneur. I can't, I have no choice but to just try something, especially, you're young, you've got, I'm living at home. I've got no expense base. So I thanks Dad for incubating me at 21, 22, 23 years old.
What was his business?
he he founded 30 years ago, he founded a consumer insights firm called Northstar Research Partners. He actually grew that up to be a fairly sizable firm at its peak with, over 150 folks up. He had maybe 50 in Toronto, a big office in New York of 30, 40, another big office in London, England, another, maybe 50 there. So I think at its peak, it was doing 40, 50 million with, a fairly sizable team. So here I am. I'm out of college, and I started an auction website. I went on to Odesk, which was the predecessor to Upwork, and I grabbed a development team out of India. And for 6, 7, 8 months, I was just grinding on developing this thing, and it was going nowhere. Like absolutely just dead end after dead end. And it's an auction website. It had a bunch of special mechanics. We were really, really compelled by, or at least I was, compelled to build something, and compelled by the modeling there. I couldn't do it. So I ended up.
It's tough because it's a double-sided marketplace. So it's tough.
You need it all. It has to work, right? Like the technology has to work. If the second marker isn't perfectly the exact same in Toronto and Calgary and Montreal and Miami and wherever, it doesn't work, right? So we couldn't figure it out. So I ended up just, I put it on the shelf for a bit, and I started picking up some freelance writing jobs on Odesk. And I immediately, just to sort of say, okay, like this thing is not happening. You can't spend an unlimited amount of time not making money. So I just to pick up some side income, I started picking up some freelance writing jobs, and I swear, right out of the gate, I just uncovered a gold mine where, I ran into some relationships where, and, we're not talking like break the bank on a per word or a per article basis, as in, I think some of the first jobs I took were like $3 or $4 an article. Just, okay, great. I whatever, right? It's better than nothing. But I ended up running into some relationships with some SEO agencies and with a subcontract agency, with a bigger content firm. And that was where I ran into LegalZoom. That's where I ran into Shopify. That's where I ran into eBay. And all of a sudden, we had big volume projects through the SEO agencies, through the subcontract. You'll note answers.com there in that lovely group of logos. About 4 months into hustling off Elance and off of Odesk, I ran into answers.com. And again, I'm 23. I've been doing this like for 2 months, for 3 months, whatever, right? And I run into answers.com, and they said, hey, we're producing 5,000 articles a week.
Oh my gosh.
How many can you write? And, they were paying 13, 14, 15, maybe $16 an article. And this was like this is 13 years ago. So back in the heyday of SEO, where every single article had to be HTML coded. It had to be in a .txt, had to be like, you had to have a whole bunch of complex little coding markers. Like you couldn't use smart apostrophes. If they uploaded it to their CMS, it would break the whole CMS, right? So we built a program with them. First week was 50 articles. Second week was 100 articles. I ran up, again, 23, no idea what I'm doing. Didn't have the team, didn't have the infrastructure, nothing. I ran up to volume with them for up to 1,000 articles every week. Wow. And I made the promise of Friday. They were like, okay, Friday, 5 p.m. deadline. There were a few, there were more than a few weekends where that Friday promise turned into a Saturday 9 a.m. a Saturday 9 a.m. just an all-nighter with I hired a dude out of an editor out of the Dallas Morning News. So it was me and my buddy Jake down in Dallas, and we were just up all night. 3, 4 a.m. would roll around. We'd call a couple writers up in the Philippines. Hey, this guy missed his assignment. Can you pick up another few articles this morning, please? So that was where we started. And
how many writers did you have at the time?
Like
1,000 articles.
Yeah.
How many writers
It's completely. I mean, at least 100. We were like, we hustled together a massive global crew of writers to execute. And, we're talking, okay, so we're getting $14 an article. Maybe the writer gets $5 or $6 an article, but then we have to have a copy editor for content, right? Okay. Like
margins are slim.
Does this meet brief? But we also had to have a line editor for all of that coding, because again, if it's not just if you do the wrong apostrophe, you'll break the machine. But also with SEO back in the day, you had like super awkward key phrases and keywords that had to be in the third paragraph, the second line of the third paragraph, and you had all these, you had a primary, you had a secondary keyword, you had a bunch of crazy briefing for H2s and all the rest. So it was fun times.
Talk about the hiring process. I'm sure you've refined it since then, but what was hiring 100 writers is no joke, right? Even if you're just taking people of a pulse. So what was your writing process then? And
that was it.
And what's it look like now?
The process then was if you have a pulse and you want to make a little money, we'll give you a shot. And by the way, like, I'm virtually serious. I mean, we would look at clips. So we would look at portfolio, which was so easy to fake, obviously. And then we would trial by fire. So the first few articles, you had a 24-hour deadline. And if you missed it, we would never talk to you again, right? And by the way, it was always trial by fire. So if you ever missed a deadline, you were out of our system. You couldn't, it was too high velocity. We were a content factory, right? It was an assembly line. And if you were a piece of our machinery that broke, we had to discard. I don't mean to undercut the human element here, but there were very, very few exceptions, and it was just pure play trial by fire.
But were they going in? Were they because even probably to get 100 people, you're looking at hundreds and hundreds.
Oh, yeah.
So would they fill out like an application? You're just like, okay, it looks decent, or what was it like then?
Literally exactly that.
Yeah.
It was like we had a massive funnel across, everywhere, Facebook groups, and we were everywhere. We paid a little referral bonus. So we had little pockets of, 5 or 6 or 10 people who all sort of knew each other. Right. So we had that was always the best. No, we had massive funnel to intake. And then, like a tiny little application form, phone number, email, how do we, add us on Skype, right? Just the basics. And then, hey, like, let's get into it. We've got an assignment. Here's the briefing, right? If you have any questions, let's hop on a quick call and then go and get it. Like, you got 24 hours.
That's kind of the best way to do it. It's a test project. I mean, you sink or swim at that point.
Yeah. But can I tell you something? I kind of live by that philosophy now in all of my hiring. I think resumes are trash. I think it's like swiping right on Tinder when you decide to say hi to somebody after you look at the resume. It's as basic as that. And interviews are trash. Like, as much as you want to put people through the ringer and give them trial, nothing matters until the rubber hits the road and they're on the ground and they're working with you. And you make a decision to hire somebody, you get them in your company, you're working with them. It's great, right? But they've got to show up. And I've earned and I've owned that philosophy over a long time. It's my own personal philosophy.
How was the hiring process changed now?
Well, if you're talking specifically about article writing company, about our writers, it's the exact, like, literally, we are the philosophy with, like, the SEO philosophy has changed obviously dramatically over the last 13 years. And every cycle, every year, every 2 years is a massive SEO update. And it's always been towards away from gamification, away from, black hat and gray hat tactics where you're keyword stuffing. Where, by the way, you can even look at our brand name is Article Writing Company. We bought the domain name, the brand name on an SEO bet. You search Article Writing Company, like that was our bet. And by the way, it's proved reasonably fruitful over the years. It's evolved tremendously. So with every iteration, with every cycle, they move away from, black hat, gray hat, like games, where they move towards more normal, reasonable PR and communications best practices. And the writing's been on the wall. Let me tell you, about a year into my business, I ran into this dude out in Montreal who was a super affiliate. So he had a few websites. This will be a little revealing, so forgive me, but he had a few websites in adult dating. Okay, so this is before Tinder, it's before Bumble, and he had these websites that would rank for things like how to get laid tonight, right? And he would rank. So again, you'd rank for a keyword like how to get laid, and then the website were a few hundred pages with guides and testimonials and stories, but also with reviews of specific adult dating services like Ashley Madison, etc. Okay, and so I met this guy. I think he had 3 or 4 websites. They were each doing $250,000, $200,000-$300,000 a year. So crazy. He's doing $1 million, doing more than that, whatever. I met this guy and I basically pitched to him I'll get to his SEO strategies next, but I basically pitched him on a massive assembly line where every week we would sort of play it out as an assembly line. So the first week we would brief a website, pull out all of the, like what's the domain name, what's the SEO hypothesis, what is the world of opportunity with that SEO hypothesis. That's week 1. So project A, week 1 is briefed, check. Week 2, project A gets written. So we would write 300-400 pages for that whole website. And then we would brief project B. Okay. Then week 3, we would write the SEO content. So we had a massive set of Excel documents. That was all the meta, SEO copy for project A. We would brief project C and we would write project B. Right. And then in week 4, the project A would get published. You had a small team out in India that would publish the websites. We would brief project D, we would write project C, and we would do the SEO. So we had an assembly line where every week we were producing a new website. This guy, just as a quick aside, he ran his business up to over $20 million over the 5 years or so that we worked together. But his SEO strategy was what was called a private blog network. Okay. So in order to produce backlinks, in order to rank these money websites, these core websites that we were writing, he had a network of 12,000 private blogs. So just little schmucky, fake blogs that would all link into the primary money site where, he would, obviously get ranked.
You can build up backlinks really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And it was spammy, right? Like it was just link spam. And every other project that we would launch would be DOA. Google would say no, like you're out of the Google sandbox and we're not going to rank you for anything. But the other 50% would turn into $200,000-$300,000 a year projects. He had a portfolio of 200-300 money sites at the end of the line. Here's where this gets tricky. Obviously, at a point in time, I think it was like 2016, maybe summer, something like that. His whole private blog network, that 12,000, up in smoke, completely gone. The juice that he was able to produce from that private blog network was just terminated. That Google just threw it out and said, this is a joke, because it was a joke, right? Like that's not real. It's manufactured. It's fake. And so obviously Google's, it's to Google's interest to produce the best quality search results, not the most gamed search results, right? And so in that way, he it was unfortunate, right? Because this was $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 a year in revenues for me at the time, right? So he'd just had his second girl at the time, few years making 20 million top line.
Hopefully he saved some of that money.
Exactly. And he just called me, he said, listen, like we're going to sunset production here. A few things. Number one, this is becoming harder and harder, and I don't want to play cat and mouse with Google forever, but also I don't want to tell my girls what I do for a living, for how I make money. Right. So, he built, I think what he did in Montreal is he built up a portfolio of condominiums that he now rents out. And that's, he spends half his time on a beach in Thailand. Yeah, exactly. Point I'm making, I suppose, is all of that was bullshit, right? Like all of that was, it was a great money-making scheme for the time, but it wasn't real. It was a fake, it was a fake game that we were playing with Google. And I knew that, and he knew that. And so what, right? But it was a fake game that we were playing, and that doesn't exist anymore. Maybe a little bit. You go to blackhatworld.com, you check out the forums. I'm sure there's lots of people that'll sell you some snake oil there, but it doesn't really exist anymore. So you have to to tie this back to, I think to tie this back to your question, are Google's interest when you're drafting copy, when you're seeking to produce a marketing outcome from SEO content marketing, Google's interest is really all about what's the best piece of content, what is the best user experience for this specific query, right? And there are acronyms like the EAT acronym or whatever, and all the rest. But the bottom line is you have to, when you're considering as a website owner, as somebody who's looking to content marketing as a means to build your business, you have to consider what is the user thinking when he or she is searching for for X or Y query, and how does my piece of content stack up against the competition. So it's not just, they wrote 2,000 words, I'm going to write 2,001 words. It's way more complicated. And so, that's how we have to hire, right? Is we look to, we have clients across in banking, in fintech, we have clients in AI, et cetera, where the quality of the immersion and the quality of the expertise that we bring to the table as a service agency matters tremendously, right? If we're bringing folks who, can't, at least through, some degree of expertise, some degree of immersion, but, also through some, journalistic and some, some journalistic tactics and some research, et cetera, can at least come to the table with a hardcore, excellent piece of copy, we're missing the mark, right? We won't be able to produce the desired outcome, and it's even a little bit more complicated. It's not just about desired outcome, but we also take and you mentioned our PR routines as well. We take the interplay between SEO and personal branding really seriously, because the truth is, when you're publishing a blog on your website, it should be rooted in a really strong SEO hypothesis, but it should also be something that plays really nicely into personal brand. It should be something that you should be thrilled to and excited to share on LinkedIn and on social media. But then also, it should be something that can, through personal brand, that can propel you into a place like, and we have a lot of clients now doing regular features in Newsweek and Forbes magazine and Inc. and Entrepreneur, where we've taken them we've grounded them through self-published content marketing work in a degree of momentum. And by the way, podcasting is the same truth, right? You ground somebody in the degree of self-published work, and then you can start to go out to places like Inc. or Entrepreneur or this podcast, right? And you can sort of that interplay. That interplay between self-published and personal brand, and then by the way, third party contribution, it matters tremendously, right? And by the way, it matters not just for business development and for the intangibles of like gravitas when you walk into the CEO's room pitching a big contract. But it also matters for SEO, right? Because you get that little extra backlink juice there from your editorial contribution.
Talk about an example, because your PR strategy, like you said, it builds a really solid foundation before sometimes you even go to a Newsweek or an Inc. So talk about, I don't know if there's an example that sticks out of, really you built this foundation and then went out, or someone gets a speaking engagement because you've built this foundation of content for this thought leader.
Totally. There's a case study on our website for a gentleman named Ian who ran a firm called Unbanked. With Unbanked, we published several hundred blog articles to their website. We then took Ian, and it's a bit of a ladder up strategy, right? We took Ian to sort of smaller and medium tier publications that we knew we could, in his industry, where we knew we could feature him and we knew we could feature his brand, but that weren't Newsweek, right? That weren't Forbes, that weren't places where there's a significant bar from a personal brand in order to get, like, they don't just take anybody, right? And so by creating almost a groundswell, by creating a volume and a momentum for him and his personal brand, we were able to get him eventually into Newsweek. And he's now, he became a regular contributor. I think he recently actually shuttered Unbanked for some macro some macro forces, unfortunately. So it's not the greatest case study anymore, I suppose, but say la vie. Through that groundswell, through that momentum, we were able to get him into a fairly significant place as a regular contributor to Newsweek. And by the way, in that process, he built his business up to $20 million a year, and he raised a $3 million round, right? Now, really hard to perfectly say we raised that $3 million for him, because we didn't, right? He raised the money, but it's not zero. As in, if you're the founder of a company that is getting a nod from places like Newsweek as a thought leader in crypto, whatever, in your industry, then you get that little intangible gravitas it matters, right? And maybe the exercise is, if you just thought about it like in a vacuum, if you had all of the other variables but this one, which is that this individual is a thought leader and this individual never does any press work, where would you place your money, right? And I think the intangible there is that you would likely look to somebody that has weight in the marketplace as a thought leader.
David, there is a book, Ryan Holiday's book. I don't know if you've heard it, Trust Me, I'm Lying, which talks about this, the very similar strategy, and it works, right? You get in the smaller ones, and then the bigger ones just pick up the smaller ones, and he lays out an amazing plan there. I mean, you have more kind of foundational content that's put in place before that, but you know what I'm talking about with Ryan Holiday?
No, it's a foundational book. And by the way, recommended to me by Thomas, my friend, the super affiliate out in Montreal specifically. I read that book when I was 25 years old, and it changed my life completely. Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Something like that. Anyway. I think he was doing a bit more, dark horse stuff with Tucker Max, etc.
Yeah.
But
his tagline is Confessions of a Media Manipulator. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
But he's got great books in general. So talk about Tiki Barber for a second and what you did.
Oh, sure. Yeah. We ran into him a number of years
and people
ago.
who don't know who Tiki Barber is, maybe just
yeah, sure. I'll get there.
Okay.
We ran into him. He was a former, NFL superstar, all-star, etc. And he was retired, and he was starting up with a partner. He was starting up a cannabis investment firm. Okay, so he had, put together 10, 15, $20 million to invest in a variety of cannabis startups. Obviously, this was during whatever it was, 5 years ago, when there was a gold rush into cannabis. So he put together a little fund, and he said, "Hey, I need deal flow, right? How can we leverage PR? How can we leverage my personal brand to go out and get deal flow?" And the answer was actually really, really simple. Anybody, right? Whether you're the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, the headline writes itself. Former NFL superstar starting cannabis venture firm. Done. We got him, I think, hundreds of media hits in places like the Wall Street Journal, CNN, Money, the New York Times, et cetera, where that was the pitch. We're representing a former NFL superstar. He's starting up a firm. And, that kind of, for a little, like our subscription pricing then was like, I think he was paying us $1,400 a month. Like, it was like really like nothing, right, in the grand scheme. And, we ran the campaign for a year, and we like the net for him was for sure millions of dollars. I mean, however, whatever vanity metric you want to pull out of thin air there was for sure millions of dollars of net exposure. He pulled in thousands of prospectuses, right? He pulled in just from top of funnel, a tremendous volume of, let's call them, investment opportunities. And that was that, right? He deployed all his money and rock and roll, right? So it was like, as far as I see it now, a lot of folks in PR communications, they're they wax a bit more poetic, and they talk about a lot more vanity metrics, and they charged a lot more too, right? But for me, it was just like, okay, we're like, simple enough. This headline writes itself. We can reproduce this story over and over and over again. Journalists are going to the idea of working with an NFL superstar for a piece is compelling enough. There's a story here. Let's just pitch them. And it was like literally the product that he was on was just a pitch factory. Like that was it, right? And it worked. It over and over and over again for a year. We got him tons and tons and tons of press coverage.
Thanks for sharing that.
Got it.
I want to talk about growth through acquisition and why you went on this journey to grow through acquisition. What made you start on that journey? And we'll talk about, the beginning. Like, how did you actually decide the types of companies to buy? Because I could see people take a couple strategies, right? Buy something similar, but you've kind of expanded.
Yeah.
So talk about your thoughts.
Yeah. The narrative is as follows. The last 18 months for article writing company have been a tremendous challenge. Okay. And there's sort of two factors. One, we don't need to belabor macroeconomic headwinds, of course. I think everybody's been feeling that over the last 2 years, whatever. The second is a unique challenge to firms doing, content writing, essentially, right? Now, our business over the last, let's say 6 or 7 years has slowly but surely been pivoting away from the old style of call it a content mill, right? A content factory. So we've been moving away from that and into full stack SEO, content marketing, PR work. But we had a number of projects with really where we were plugged into SEO agencies as just a provider of the raw material, right? We're talking maybe, in some, let's call it $1 million a year in annual revenues, whatever that is, right? that all went up in smoke over the last 18 months. And I'm sure you understand why. They all, just every single one of them said, hey, we're no longer going to use human writing talent. We're going AI. Bye-bye. And of course, for them, like I understand, I saw ChatGPT, I saw Jasper. We started using it, right? Like but they're, of course, for them, marginal cost to produce a piece of copy goes to zero, and then they need an editor to make it look and feel human for whatever, a couple bucks, and so that business really, the bottom fell out, just gone. And and for a long time I was like ashamed and a little embarrassed about the business like fundamentally failing. Right. I did recently come to learn that this was not a unique story with article writing company. A lot of firms that focused on content and SEO content specifically have been like the bottoms fell out. The market's essentially, whatever you want to say, 60-80% of that marketplace is just gone. Okay. And so, with those two factors in mind, now I'll give you a little, I'll peel this back a little bit, and then I'll come to my strategy in a second. My father, the agency that he started, was actually part of a conglomerate of marketing agencies called MDC. A gentleman by the name of Miles Nadell started this. It was an old school friend of my father's. The story goes, my dad was the president of a much larger consumer insights firm here in Toronto that was acquired. Okay, so a massive German conglomerate purchased Goldfarb Consultants. This is 40 years ago. Okay, and through that acquisition, the German conglomerate made a number of promises to my father and to the senior leadership of that firm, through and post acquisition. They didn't meet any of those promises after acquisition. And so my father left, and he took the entire senior leadership team to Miles Nadell at MDC Partners, and they started Northstar Research Partners. Okay. And that was, they had a nice 15 years, and then 2008 happened, and my dad left, and it was a bit of a shit show, right? But point I'm making is, I've always sort of been obsessed with the model, with the Miles Nadell model, and with Miles Nadell himself. So I saw the writing on the wall for article writing company and the way that it was built, and it especially like just feeling the pain of losing client after client after client. And so it's like we're losing all this revenue, and because of macroeconomic headwinds, we're having a really, really hard time in our traditional way of getting new projects in the door. And so the pain was real. We were shrinking, we were laying off staff, all the rest. And I just started sniffing around with M&A, and the growth through acquisition strategy, obviously, long tail with Miles Nadell, but also like there's a lot of really smart people now talking about it, like Cody Sanchez, etc. And I just sort of started like putzing around on MicroAcquire and all these different marketplaces, Barney, whatever. And I just started taking some phone calls. Now, I suppose this is a personality quirk. I just did it, right? Like at the time, I wasn't so directional. I just sort of started having conversations. I'm sure some of the early ones were really bad, right? I started having conversations. I started meeting people like, why are you selling your business? Like, what are you staying around? Are you leaving? And as I was in the market, as I'm just acting, right, as I'm just moving, and I started to find it, right? I started to say, oh, there's something here that I can work, right? And so I probably met with 500 different agencies over a 12-18 month period. I came to terms on it with maybe a half a dozen agencies. most prominently about a year ago now, I met an agency down in Florida. I can't really talk too much about this, unfortunately. We're probably still under an NDA. I don't know, but we ended up having to walk away from that deal. It was we after $40,000 in legals, we walked away at the 1 yard line. They were losing a big client. It was unfortunate. So we had a couple stories like that. And then, 2 months ago, I did execute on 2 deals in the same week. They were small deals. They were deals that I could capture myself.
Growth through acquisitions. Why you decided on that a little bit, but we'll get into how you vetted the deals in your first deals.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for having me back. Forgive me. I know it was 2 days ago, but I don't exactly recall where we left off. So if I'm restating a few things, your audience, I hope, will forgive me. The narrative goes that the last 12, 18 months with AWC, with Article Writing Company, have been intensely challenging. In probably 7 years ago now, we pivoted away from the high volume content business. So we really just stopped selling, in the marketplace for, high volume, cheap and cheerful content. And we really did look to pivot into, quality over quantity, higher dollar figure campaigns, long tail SEO success, but also, with a knack and a lean against PR and against thought leadership for our clientele. So that was, it was a long time ago when we did make that conscious, slow, but sure conscious decision to really pivot away from, but we had a lot of projects that were grandfathered. And, probably a half a dozen projects that were, maybe close to $1 million a year in revenues that over the last 18 months, obviously with macroeconomic headwinds, but more importantly with AI coming in and eating the content writing business, like eating that whole industry alive. It was tremendously challenging. I would argue we lost maybe like $700,000-800,000 in annual revenues on behalf of from ChatGPT, basically, right? Like it came in and just like slowly but surely, we had, an SEO agency out in Colorado that was paying us at, their best months were $30,000+ in revenue. So like a really healthy client who just called one day and says, "Yo, we're out. We're moving to AI," and just like again, slowly but surely, that was really challenging, obviously, right? And so I guess I just sort of read the tea leaves in whatever way, but also just I had no choice. I had to move on. I mean, I'm out in the field taking, dozens, if not hundreds of sales calls on our normal routines with content marketing and with PR. And I'm not having the same success. And we're watching our annual revenues really decline in a significant way because AI is eating our lunch, right? And so I just on a whim, and it was probably 13, 14 months ago now, I just started taking phone calls for companies that were listed. Okay, so these were companies that were listed whether through a brokerage or on, MicroAcquire, now acquire.com, or Biz by Sell or whatever. I just started taking phone calls, right? And I think I now that I mentioned it, I do think I mentioned this in part 1, but I started taking phone calls. I'm just like, okay, let me see what I can do here. I have no idea what I'm doing. Right. But let's just start feeling it out. Right. On the back end, I did also start taking some calls with some potential partners that might want to invest. I might want to, participate. And I was getting some good traction. And early on, we ran into, I'm going to have to tread really lightly here because there was an NDA and the deal fell through. But early on, we ran into a really compelling deal for a firm down in Florida. Bunch of government contracts. It was rocking, and it happened to be a perfect tuck-in to one of the partners that I'd already, started having a conversation with. And so I met with the guy. Actually, my family's got a place down in Florida. So I met with them. Their office was like 20 minutes down away from my family's place down there in Miami. And so I met with them, and then like literally that afternoon, I called my partner. I'm like, we gotta act here, right? Because this is rough. This isn't the exact detail, but I've got $1 million acquisition on a firm doing $3 million a year. They're mismanaged, but they're not terribly profitable, but they've got tens of millions of dollars a year through their clients as a marketing agency, through their clients in media spend. Okay. And my partner here in Toronto is a media agency. Okay. And so
you can help optimize it.
Totally. But there's a massive economy of scale there. That agency was using other media agencies on behalf of their clients. So we could literally walk into that agency for $1 million, let's say. Again, this is rough because I don't want to cross NDA or whatever. We could walk in there for $1 million, and we could unlock $2-3 million in net new annual fees, which, because of just to give you a bit further context, because of the nature of my partner's business, that the net enterprise value there would have been tens of millions of dollars in net new enterprise value. So not just unlocking the net new fees, but enterprise value because of their, because they're obviously a pretty successful firm. The net enterprise value with that media going over there was tremendous. Just a huge opportunity. So we worked with that one for 3 or 4 months. I was back and forth to Florida a whole bunch to get that closed. We probably spent 45 grand on legals. And at the 1 yard line, the seller calls me, says, we're losing our biggest client. So, so
you would have to change the terms and the value based on that, and both parties didn't want to. Not
even. I actually did negotiate the terms down to, again, roughly nothing. But the problem was that they had just signed a massive lease, as in they had let's say $1 to $2 million in a go forward liability there.
Yeah, you'd have to take that on.
And we were not prepared to assume that liability. So unfortunately, the deal was no longer on terra firma. So it didn't work out, unfortunately. But we learned a lot, and luckily 2.5 months ago now, I did complete two smaller deals that sort of play really nicely against article writing companies. So we're starting now to integrate, to seek some version of integration on a client to client basis, and it's turning on in a really fun way, which is lovely. Obviously, December's a bit. It's December. I'm sure this episode will air in a few months, but December is a bit tricky with marketing agencies, and one of them is a lead generation agency, and essentially the modality there is such that they we do cold email, we do cold outreach on LinkedIn, and there's a nice little purgatory there in December where corporate America just completely checks out. But we got a ton.
Was that the first one? I know Nerdy Joe and Cascade Virtual are the two companies. Yeah. Which was the first one that you did?
Well, Nerdy Joe was on a Monday, and then Cascade was on a Tuesday.
Really? So you were negotiating at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. They're twins. They just are, one was born first, I guess.
Was that hard? Because a lot of the businesses I have interviewed who acquire, there's like an integration time period, and that can take a little while. And now you have two, like you said, twins. Having one kid is hard enough, and then you have two, and you're changing 2 diapers with one hand. It's like, how did that go? Would you do that again?
Here's here's how I thought about it and why I thought it was a reasonable hypothesis going into the double dip in 1 week. You're right. Classically, it's insane, but these are small acquisitions. So we weren't talking about, multi-million dollar acquisitions here. These were smaller firms. Nerdy Joe was essentially a one-man boutique. Okay. So they had 3 guys, but like essentially it was a one-man boutique. And so, and they're, they weren't old. They were an 8-month-old company. Okay. The founder
seems risky.
Oh, it's incredibly risky, but that's why I was able to do it myself with no partners and no backing and, not to get into the terms of the deals necessarily, but it was the nature of the transaction was reasonably risk averse. Okay. So the broad hypothesis was Nerdy Joe was a young company and the founder was really struggling to build the foundations to build, he's hustling, he's selling, he's struggling. He's got clients that are great. He's got clients that are not so great, right? All of the normal and like young agency stuff, right? So I looked at it and I'm like, I really like this founder. I like the book of business that he has, but also the really, really compelling piece to the puzzle was that through SEO, and as somebody who spent 13 years in SEO, I knew this very specifically. Through SEO, they're generating 50, 60 new business meetings every single month, right? So essentially, I looked at this as like, okay, he's got something here. He's got a small book of business. He's got significant SEO success. So I know that we can propel the business forward, but they have no real firm. There's nothing but a one-man boutique who's running the whole firm on a notepad, right? And I'll give you a bit of, I'll peel this onion back for you a little bit further. In cold email, okay, every single one of their routines, they have to acquire domains. So what you do when you're doing cold email for clients is you acquire lookalike domains. So you're not sending cold emails from the primary domain.
Blacklist your main domain.
Exactly.
And if you send from your mail, I was telling this to someone the other day, David, they're like, yeah, I think we're gonna do some cold email. I'm like, you're gonna blacklist your whole company.
Be careful.
If you start using your own domain.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So they, on behalf of clients, they'll buy 20 they'll buy 10 to 20 domains on a campaign basis, sometimes more. And so that's the start. And then for every domain, you'll buy 3 inboxes. Okay. And so you can imagine if you've got 30 clients and every single one of them has 20 domains, that's all of a sudden you have 400 domains. And then if you've got 3 inboxes for every domain, that's 1,200 inboxes, right? None of that was organized. They had they had clients that had come and gone. And so they had all these like old domains and old inboxes that they were still paying for, right? And so like the just like on day one, I walked in, I'm like, whoa, like holy hell, there's like day 2, I hired somebody specifically. I'm like, I need somebody whose whole job is to manage a spreadsheet listing out all of our domains, listing out all of our active inboxes and attaching them into specific projects. We got 1,200 inboxes that we're paying for and half of them we're not using. It's crazy. It was completely insane. So the whole foundation of the firm was built on the back of a napkin. And this, he's a bright young kid. And so it was like,
it's impressive to build that in 8 months. Really impressive.
Yes, very, very impressive. So,
how do you evaluate that? And you don't have to get into numbers, but like, are you doing a multiple of EBITDA? How are you deciding on ultimately what you're going to offer?
Yeah. The way that I frame our offers generally is as follows. And especially with younger agencies where there's a bunch of risk factors, we will have a variety of net value coming to the founder. First is cash at close, right? So, whatever that makes sense. The second is a revenue-based earnout. So, you can imagine like after 8 months where, the revenue only picked up in the last 2 months, right? That in this case, the cash at close would have to be quite low, and the revenue earnout would have to be, compelling enough where he says, okay, with you and with the, with the project here and with the camp, like with our, like with the agencies, et cetera, that we can actually build a company and actually build SOPs and like hire the right people to do the right jobs, et cetera, et cetera. If we can do all of that, then I will properly capture that revenue earnout. And the same is true for an equity-based earnout, right? So you have valuation, generally speaking, a good agency should trade in the 2 to 4x EBITDA range, but like throw that out the window if the company's 8 months old. It doesn't matter, right? You have to, I'm a gut instinct. I'm just a gut guy. I really like the guy. I wanted to work with him. And that was I liked the book of business. I liked the marketing power, right? But I'll add, I really, really wanted a lead generation agency to be the first acquisition. And the reason is, if I can get that right, every next acquisition becomes 1,000 times easier. I can fire in, and I'm now every conversation I'm having, I'm like, I can fire 100 new business meetings your way on a month-to-month basis. Like, what do you
could use
think
it for all your other companies?
Exactly. So to me, it was like, if I can nail that marketing methodology through a company that I own and actually turn on real new business success, every next acquisition is just 1,000 times easier. So just to go back to the hypothesis, Nerdy Joe was a crazy young boutique agency built on the back of a napkin, and Cascade was the opposite. Okay. So as a virtual assistance agency, they had way too many staff hanging around for how much revenue they were doing. And they've got a tremendous group of virtual assistants that are hyper organized, that are hyper diligent. And because
I need a company to manage all those domains from Nerdy Joe.
It was in my head, I'm like, okay, there's these guys are operating on the back of a napkin. These guys have Airtable and spreadsheets, and they're I like Mackenzie, who's the CEO at Cascade, is a killer building SOPs, because every single one of their clients has to have concentrated hyper specific SOPs. If you have a virtual assistant, and they quit or whatever else, you need a new one to come in, right? And they need to learn the system right away. So it just felt like it really felt as if the marriage there from a team perspective made a lot of sense. And so, it was both deals were like, again, we're not talking multi-million-dollar acquisitions where there's like a complex 2-year integration plan. So the deals were structured in such a way where it was reasonable from a risk perspective for me, right? But also, I knew I had to change the game, right? Like I knew I had no choice but to, really, really blow up my day to day and what I was out in the field working on. And honestly, like so far it's been banging. It's been great.
What have been some of the challenges? I know there were maybe some hiccups with Nerdy Joe.
Yeah. So far it's been great, but this was fascinating, and I will never, I don't think I'll ever really fully understand this. Ernest, the CEO of Nerdy Joe, resigned. So about 6 weeks into our relationship, he wrote me a little message. He says, "Yo, I don't want to get into the personal stuff here, but he had to go. And to me, it was terribly unfortunate. And as follows, I benefit obviously by letter of the agreement, and I do have a fiduciary, I have a responsibility to my partners and to Mackenzie and at Cascade and everybody else to behave in the best way for the firm. So I said, for me, for the partners, etc., we benefit tremendously. By letter of the agreement, you will forfeit everything, right? You'll forfeit all of your equity, all of your earnout, like everything. This is a huge mistake. We benefit from it, right? So I'm not going to beg you forever, but I just from a moral and an ethical standpoint, I think you're making a massive, massive decision and a massive mistake that you will come to regret over the coming years. My view, and this, there was some personal stuff here, etc. My view is you should take this was a Monday. I think it was even a Sunday. I'm like, take the week off, sleep on it, and let's talk next Sunday, right? I need you to have a real, minute to make this decision and not just hurry yourself out of the firm because, and this was crazy for him, right? We bought the company early October and into November, we sold a ton of new clients, right? And so we're into 40 active campaigns all of a sudden for his business. And it was built on a house of cards, right? And he was having to buy, as we were upgrading every single of the core systems with new people, new SOPs, etc. He's having to do, do this whole new thing for him, which I don't think he really acknowledged in the way that he was thinking about the acquisition and the partnership and the future of the firm. And not only did all of a sudden he's managing 10 people, right, as the president of this company, and all of a sudden he's managing 40 clients, and that volume for him just became way, the volume of daily pings on Slack and daily emails and phone calls and sales calls. It was amazing, right? Because we were selling and we were grabbing a lot of really, really healthy new chunks of business. So out of the gate, it was rocking. But then for me, the challenge was, oh, okay, now this guy's out. What the hell do we do now, right? So it's been a few. It's literally, I'm in the thick of it right now. It's been a few weeks since he properly resigned. He took that week. He was like, no, David, I am out. I need a year off. I'm, again, I don't want to go too deep into the personal stuff, but he's like, I need 6 months. I need 12 months. I gotta go. It's not a money thing. It's not an equity thing. I'm sorry, but this is my final decision. Okay, I'm not going to beg you. It's over. I'll take over. It's fine. I called all of our clients. I called everybody. I'm like, okay, this is what's happening. Let's rock. Generally speaking, no major hiccups internally. There was obviously a little bit of trepidation in some of the, in some of our employees, et cetera. But funny enough, we had reached a position in the build of the company, in the build of all of the core buckets, all the core systems, all the core teams, et cetera, where his resignation didn't really affect anything. And now now I have to take a half a dozen or more sales calls every week. So what? I've been doing that for 13 years and I'm a silver-tongued devil, right? So it's okay, great. And by the way, I could probably be in a better position to identify great opportunities, but also identify great opportunities that play to all three agencies, right? So it sort of worked out nicely in that way. And okay, I'm sad because I really liked working with him and I like him and I respect him and I wanted the best for him. And I believe he made a huge mistake, but I wasn't going to beg him forever, right? So it was a pretty significant challenge, like a whopper of a challenge, and something that honestly, my M&A hypothesis is founder centric. And I lead with that in a lot of my conversation. Like, I want to work with great founders, and for him to resign in 6 weeks was the opposite of my intent. I wanted to get rich with him through this company. And unfortunately he's gonna walk away. He walks away from some pretty significant earnouts and equity position in a group of agencies that are all growing, right? Like it's a sad dynamic for him, but c'est la vie.
So what's the next step for that company as far as what are you looking for to hire? Do you want to hire kind of like a CEO of that company so you don't have to run it? Or are you just going to hire salespeople? What's the next step for hiring for that? So you can, obviously you say, oh, it's not as big of a deal, like 6 to 10 calls a week. But for you who's super busy, that is kind of a big deal. I mean, that's a lot of time.
Yeah. I like taking sales calls though. I think that, by the way, I think they're important. I think it's important to stay in touch with the market. The future plans are a little complicated because I'm actually on the 1 yard, like literally on the 1 yard line, where we have an APA in place right now, et cetera, with a firm that does this is such intense serendipity. You could write this story, right? The serendipity is that we have another firm in a stronger position, similar sized, but in a much stronger position. They're 5 years old, et cetera. Exact same business model, exact similar products, right? They're in lead generation. We got another firm on the 1 yard line that we're about to close on, and so it's like kind of awesome, right? Like we're gonna
you have some crossover and some redundancy where they can kind of help take over some of these functions.
Yeah. So there's a leadership vacuum there that will presumably be replaced. They have a sales team. They've got a bunch of engineering talent. There's going to be a bunch of economies of scale. And like, if I can just plug that right in, it just feels like a perfect potential marriage, right? And we'll more than double our marketing power together now, except like it's a coup if it plays, right? And so I got to get it over into the end zone, right? But B, I got there's a hard integration. There'll be 12 weeks of hard work there to make it work. But I believe it's too good to be true. It's crazy.
It's funny, there's an episode I did with Jason Swank where they've been buying up agencies, and he talked about the exact structure. He's like, we give whatever 2x EBITDA, you get X amount at close percentage, you get X amount in equity. And then I had speaking of cold email, the founder of Mailshake on. They've been also acquiring SaaS companies. He's the opposite. He's like, I think he was talking about, if the founder wants to stay, we don't want it. We want to take over the company. And those two were complete opposites. Like one wanted it. So I'm curious from your standpoint, and I'm going to make up numbers for a second, but let's say the top line of the company is $1 million. They're doing 200,000 in EBITDA. And let's say you offer 2 times. So it's 400,000. And there's probably some nuances there, but like, what are you thinking of percentage of that 400,000 cash at close to revenue earnout to, and then they're actually getting equity in that company specifically, or the larger entity that you're building?
Got to be the larger entity. And here's why. They're in a small agency, there's just going to be so much crossover. There's going to be so much integration. And so if we had a mother brand, like a mother holdco that had a variety of corporation, like separate corps that owned each one of our assets, the interplay there is insane, right? As in, to properly integrate, we're talking small teams, we're talking small agencies. There's going to be a lot of crossover, right? other, like, hopefully, right? So if you want to integrate that without all of the founders saying, hey man, why did you take 20 hours from my account manager? I'm paying him, but they're getting the benefit, right? If you don't want that, if you want real integration, if you don't want like intensely complicated management agreements and then settlements at the end of every month, like if you don't want a brutal bookkeeping routine, my view is they need to all be part of the mother, like the mother brand. So that's how we're playing. But also they get, as that starts to play, they get the equity position in the mother brand is of significance, right? So that's the model we're after. I understand other people are in a different modality. To touch on the dissonance there between the SaaS and the agency, my hypothesis is all about the founder, right? And in agencies, founder dynamism, founder energy it's kind of like 9/10 of the law, right? Like in a SaaS company, it's way less mission critical to have a dynamic, energetic founder. You can, just from a marketing stance, right? You can have that in the market where they got a podcast, they're out on Twitter, they're building a personal brand, and that can be a great means for customer acquisition. But it's not always, it doesn't have to be that way. You can have a great SaaS company where the founder is just in the back room and nobody knows who he is. And so if that's true, if they're not a part of the critical infrastructure, they're not talking to clients, they're not talking to, they're not talking to the marketplace in any marketing capacity, then they're expendable, right? And so that, by the way, that plays into valuation, that plays into the terms that you might offer. My view is the opposite, that in agencies, that founders they're 9/10 of the law, right? So unfortunately, because a founder leaves, and this was obviously going through my mind when Ernest left. A founder leaves, clients start to get shaky, people start to get shaky, right? And it like all of a sudden the whole thing can go up in smoke if you're not really, really careful. And if you're not holding from a place of strength, you could blow a massive acquisition, a massive asset, because the founder doesn't want to participate anymore. And by the way, it happens, right? And so there's a valuation question there, and there's a terms question, which is, and this is why we drafted our letter, or this is why we drafted our purchase agreement in that way. This is why we drafted our terms in that way. It's like we aren't prepared to assume that risk in a massive way. Like if you want to participate, if you want to come in, if you want to sell us your agency, like there's going to have to be a long tail where that's the majority of the gravy. And that's the only way it's going to work for us, because the founder is too important.
And I'm not going to, corner you into an answer with the exact percentages or whatever, but just generally, when we talk about that example, I know only a few minutes of, it's $1 million top line, 200,000 EBITDA. If you're offering 400,000 or whatever, what is kind of the general, what you're considering from cash at close to revenue earnout and then equity in the larger entity? And I'm sure, in private equity, the later tuck-ins, if you're going to sell, get less equity than if someone's going to be in this for a longer period of time. So I'm just curious your thoughts around those three pieces.
I think the intangibles here are as follows, and they would matter tremendously in the way that the offer, the LOI might be structured, right? First of all, who's the founder? How long have they been at this? What's their stated intent? Are they looking to be out of the business in 12 months? Are they looking to be out of the business in 36 months? Are they just looking for a new partner, right? So what's their stated intent? And you have to settle that inside of some risk spectrum, right? Because they're going to tell you things that aren't true, or that are half truths. Or by the way, they get on the other side of an acquisition and things don't turn out the way they wanted to, and things change, right? So you have to settle that inside of some expectation spectrum. So that's a big intangible. It's like, who's the founder? What are they all about? What are they looking to do? Right. And the next is, what is the nature of the business? And so there's a number of pieces to the puzzle that I look at, specifically, obviously, how many clients do you have? What is the contract? What's the average contract value? What's the lifetime value, right? Is there a significant long tail value in the majority of your contracts? Or are you like churning and burning clients, and do you have a retention problem? Do you have a dozen government contracts that are 5 years long, right? What's the future value of all of the contracts that you have? A, and B, how mature is your sales and marketing stack? Are you in a position where you're growing? Are you in a position, at the very least, where you're replacing top line revenues that churn with new business, right? So are you in a healthy and a compelling position from both a active contract value standpoint and from a sales and marketing side? How are you growing? Right. And the dissonance here is tremendous. I've met with companies that are doing 100 sales meetings every single month with, where they're doing a bit of a churn and burn game. And then I've met with companies who are doing 5 pitches a year, and they have a half a dozen 3-4 year contracts with, massive, maybe government contracts or whatever. Right. So the dissonance there is actually intense in a marketing agency context. So the value, naturally, if you've got team, if you've got systems in place, if operations are reasonably, marketing agencies are a little hectic, but if they're reasonably normalized, and you've got all of the above, right? Long-term contracts and a reasonable approach to sales and marketing, then the valuation and the upfront cash and all of that should be a lot healthier, because there's a lot there that's been de-risked. But if the company's churning and burning, and you're having a hard time with retention, if there's an immature sales stack, et cetera, then rest upon the energy and the dynamism of the founder, but have a hard conversation. I have the hard conversation, which is there's way too much risk in all of these things. Here's why, and here's the best that we can do. And if that doesn't meet your expectation, then thanks anyways. Yep. Right.
David, I want to be respectful of your time. I know we're at time, so I just want to thank you. Thanks for sharing your journey. Thanks for sharing the stories and being vulnerable. I really appreciate it. I know everyone will appreciate it too. And everyone check out everything, all of David's sites. So yeah, David,
find me on Twitter. It's at David Tile, Tile.
Thanks, David.
All right, rock and roll.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like $100 grand.